I'm gonna change it now. I'll create a new one, and if you submit that one, then I'll give you negative points. Think Amari's coming? You do anything fun this weekend, Cyrus? Went to a wedding. That was fun. Thanks. Is in Jersey. It's my wife is from. Yeah, well, careful. My wife's from Jersey. Yeah. She's not like a Jersey person then. It's expensive. All right, it's 2 o'clock, so let's go ahead and begin. This is a fun day, I think. This is chapter 12, and we'll talk about motivational theories, ways we can motivate staff. What I think is interesting about this is that even if you're not in management, you can use these theories to motivate other people, like your teammates in your group projects, or people on your sports teams. So here are the objectives for today. So we'll talk about the role of motivation in accomplishing goals, specifically organizational goals. We'll look at what are the needs that motivate employees. We'll talk about process theories of motivation. So what are some processes that motivate employees? We'll talk about different ways to design jobs to make them motivating. We'll talk about 4 types of behavior modification, the role of compensation in motivating employees, and then we'll talk for our career readiness at motivating ourselves to be successful. All right. The first step, we'll look at what is motivation, why is it important for performance, and then we'll talk about the 4 different perspectives on motivation. So in your own words, I'd like to have someone try to define motivation. There's a book definition, but see if you can put it in your own words. Yeah, Javi? What gets you going? Okay, I like that. Anything I would add to that? Yeah, drive. I like that too. Those are good. This is the book's definition. It's a psychological process that arouses and directs people's goal-directed behavior. But we can think of it as like what drives people, what gets people going. What are the things that'll make people want to work hard for us or for our organization? Why is it important? So motivation determines a lot of things. Organizational researchers are very interested in motivation because it will predict where people want to work, like what jobs they want to hold, how long they want to stay there, how hard they want to work while we're there. We talked about attitudes in the last chapter. Attitudes are driven, or they can be a representation of our motivation to work hard for our job and to stick around longer. Throughout this presentation, we'll talk about ways that managers can motivate their staff. There's a lot of ways we can motivate staff, but if we want to be effective in our role as a manager, we have to figure out one way that resonates with them. Let's look at what causes motivation. There are personal factors that cause motivation and contextual factors. We've talked about a lot of the personal factors already. So personality, we talked about last week. Remember core self-evaluations. Remember how if we believe we can be successful in something, then we're more likely to be motivated to strive towards it. What I like about this is it shows us that contextual factors also predict motivation. So a lot of these things we've talked about as well. Org culture, values, group norms. We've talked about these things. And as a manager, I can look at this and say that just because my employee is unmotivated, that doesn't mean that they're lazy. Maybe there's nothing wrong with them, but maybe it's the org culture that's causing them to be unmotivated. All right. So let's look at the process of motivation. Here's another one of our 4-step processes that loops back on itself with a feedback step. I like this representation of motivation because it shows us some of the core aspects here. So the first is that unfilled needs are what prime us to be motivated. In general, people will only be motivated to work towards something if they feel like it's going to help fulfill one of their needs. If they have an unfulfilled need, that creates this motivation, which leads to behaviors to satisfy that need. And if it's successful, they'll get the reward they need to fulfill that need. Okay. If you learn one thing from this chapter, it's that people will act in ways that they believe will help them fulfill their needs. So the hard job of a manager is to figure out what are their needs. People have different needs, right? We have to figure out how can I help this person fulfill their needs. All right, we'll do the self-assessment a little early this chapter, but I want to do the chapter 12 self-assessment on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and then we'll discuss. So let's take like 4 minutes to fill that out. All right. Is anyone still working on this? All right, let's go ahead and discuss. This one is pretty interesting. We're learning about our intrinsic versus our extrinsic motivation. I know it gave you kind of a summary of those two. Can y'all define that in your own words? What does it mean to have extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation? Abby? Yep. Yeah, those are good, two really good examples. And basically, you did a good job saying extrinsic is external factors, like a bonus. Salary is what comes to mind for most people. Like I work hard to get a salary. If it wasn't for the salary, how many of y'all would keep your job? Probably very few, maybe none. The intrinsic factors are what motivate us from within. So I feel satisfied by volunteering, for example. That's intrinsically motivated. I don't get a reward for doing that. Okay. All right. The follow-up question is, which do you think is better, intrinsic or extrinsic motivation? So which of these is better? You said it's personal? Is that like a it depends answer? All right. This is the first time it doesn't depend. There is a correct answer here. Mike, what do you think? Well, yeah, why do you say intrinsic? Yes. Yeah, you're exactly right. When it comes to management, having employees who are intrinsically motivated is always better than extrinsically motivated. Imagine you tell your employees, like, all right, if I catch y'all slacking off, you're gonna get punished. And if you're around to watch them and they know that you're watching them, they're not gonna slack off. But as soon as you leave, if you take a vacation for a week, what do you think they're doing when you're gone for the week? Like they're probably, yeah, they're doing whatever they want to do because they know that you're not going to catch them and punish them. But if someone is intrinsically motivated, if you get someone to really want to do their job for intrinsic reasons, then when you're gone on vacation, they're probably still going to work hard because they want to feel that satisfaction of doing what they're doing. When it comes to management, intrinsic is better. Research shows that it lasts longer than extrinsic motivation. So if people buy into something intrinsically, that lasts longer than what results from rewards and punishments. Right. So we've talked about buy-in a lot when it comes to like feedback and planning and goal setting. The same is true for motivation. When people can buy into the motivational process, it tends to be more intrinsic in nature. All right. I tricked y'all. Usually the answer is it depends, but not this time. So here are the 4 perspectives on motivation. We'll spend a little time talking about each of these, but these are just 4 different ways to look at what motivates people. So the first perspective is content. So what are things that motivate people, like salaries, for example? What are the processes that motivate people? Job design, which we've talked about last week, and then the reinforcement perspective. This looks a lot like chapter 2. Remember, chapter 2 is org theories, and we talked about different ways to look at an organization. The same principle that applies here is that no one theory is correct or universally agreed upon. But if you can learn like something interesting about each of these theories, you can apply it to motivate your employees. So let's take a look at these. We're going to start with the content perspective. These are, then the content perspective, or perspectives. So 4 different ways to look at what are the contents that motivate people. And we'll start with one that we're already familiar with, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We talked about this in chapter 2. And this is the one I think y'all are most familiar with because it's very popular in psychology. Maslow said there's this hierarchy of needs, and they are shaped in a pyramid such that you have to have your base needs met before you can reach your highest level of self-actualization. So he defines these 5 levels: physiological, safety, love, esteem, and self-actualization. And if you remember what this told us as management is that people can't be their best employees. That is, they can't be self-actualized unless they have their physiological needs met. So if people are, imagine you work in the Middle East right now and you're worried about war going on. Are you going to be your best, most productive employee in that situation? Definitely not. So as management, we have to make sure that people feel safe. They have love and esteem. You don't really give people love in organizations, but a social network goes a long way. And once they have those things, then they can be their best, hardest worker. All right, so that's what Maslow says. These are the 5 needs. McClellan said there's different needs. We can organize needs into 3 categories here. And people tend to have one preference. So either they have a need for achievement, a need for affiliation, or a need for power. So if I'm high in need for achievement, that means I want to get a PhD. I'm doing a PhD. That would signal that I'm high in need for achievement. If you're high in need for affiliation, you like to socialize. Maybe you're more extroverted. Family is really important to you. And then need for power. This one's actually has been broken into 2 categories here. I might want power for personal power reasons. Like I want to be CEO because I want to give people directions. I don't want to have a boss. I don't want to answer to nobody. Like I have a high need for personal power. Institutional power is a little different. It's like I want to be in control because I want to see this be successful. You might see a situation where, I don't know, your student org is really suffering because it has crappy leadership. And normally you don't see yourself as a leader, but you think, maybe I'll step up because I think I can make this a better situation. That's a need for power, but for more of a communal reason. The one assumption underlying this theory is that typically people have one need that dominates. So in an ideal world, we're all well balanced. We equally desire achievement, affiliation, and power. But what we tend to see is people have a preference. So if you have a really high need for power, specifically personal power, then you're labeled a control freak. I'm just curious. I want to go through this real quick. Who thinks they're high in need for achievement? Just by show of hands. All right. How about affiliation? A little less. How about power? Would anybody admit to being a control freak? Tarun? All right, cool. Yeah. If we're studying management, probably we have a higher need for power than average. Sometimes that's hard to admit. All right. So that's the second way to look at what's the content that drives people. This one's probably the most popular today, at least in research. This is self-determination theory. And it says that people are motivated to achieve 3 things: competence, autonomy, and relatedness. So competence is, I'm good at what I do. People don't want to work in a job that they suck at. Generally speaking, that's not very motivating. But if you're really good at your job, you get a lot of praise for that. That's pretty rewarding. You feel satisfied because you're good at it. Those are all great motivators. Autonomy means you have some personal freedoms to make decisions. Have you all ever had a boss that micromanages you? And in that situation, did you feel motivated to go above and beyond? Usually not. So giving people autonomy tends to motivate them to work harder. And relatedness, that's kind of very similar to need for affiliation. So I feel like I fit in here. Like I have a social group, I have friends or family. So Deci and Ryan, those are the 2 people that created this. They said if you have those 3 things within your job, then you're going to be motivated to work harder. This is more about these things, these contents are more about intrinsic motivation. You have these 3 things to be more intrinsically motivated. Cool. All right, and there's one more theory of contents. This is Herzberg's 2-factor theory. A couple things I'll say before we dive into this is that there's a lot of terminology that I think is confusing, and you shouldn't focus on that. But what I like about this theory is that it talks about satisfaction separately from dissatisfaction, and I'll explain that in just a sec. But essentially, they say that some things, which are labeled motivating factors, lead to satisfaction, and some things are called hygiene factors. That leads to dissatisfaction. I think this figure does a pretty good job of illustrating that. So these are the motivating factors, things like achievement, recognition, responsibility. And then hygiene factors are like pay and security. How are your working conditions? Do you like your supervisor? Okay. So first thing, ignore the labels like hygiene factor. They will not be on the final exam. The second thing, though, when I think about how we can apply this to management, what do you think this tells us about where managers tend to go wrong motivating staff? Or you could think of it as, how can this help us motivate our staff more effectively? Any thoughts, Rubisha? Yeah, you're exactly right. Which one do you think they tend to prioritize more? The top ones? Yeah, I agree. In my personal experience, I see managers tend to prioritize the top. They say, like, well, I'm giving you all this recognition. Like, I gave you all a pizza party. Wasn't that pretty cool? And they forget to look at, like, are you paying them well? Do they have good working conditions? How are your interpersonal relationships? So what I like about this theory is it shows you not just to focus on satisfying people, but also helping them avoid dissatisfaction. You could argue if those are different things or not, but it is still useful to think of it that way. This part, I think, is nice for helping us organize. There's these 4 different perspectives on content, theories of motivation. In general, they focus on either these higher level needs like self-actualization and self-determination theory is all about the intrinsic motivation stuff. So those are nice, but we also have to consider the lower level needs, like, is the building safe? Do they have like proper pay? That's a hygiene condition. Okay. In general, again, none of these are like, I don't know if ubiquitous is the right word. None of them are like universally agreed upon, but we can use all 4 of these to try to motivate our staff in different ways. All right, so that's content. Let's look at the process perspective. So what are the processes that employees look at when they that will help determine if they're going to be motivated or not? We'll look at justice theory, expectancy theory, and goal setting theory. The first, equity/justice theory, essentially says that people strive for fairness and justice in social exchanges. So, like, if I work really hard and I work harder than Jawad, do I get paid more than Jawad? Or do we get paid the same? Because if we get paid the same and I work harder, that's not very fair. And I'll probably work less hard as a result of that. That's an example of how I perceive equity or justice and how that can influence my motivation. The key thing here is that individuals make comparisons based on some other person as a comparison. So I think this figure does a decent job at illustrating that. As an employee, I look at my inputs. So what am I putting into this? My outputs, is that resulting in like favorable pay and bonuses and all that? Then I compare that ratio to other people's ratio. So again, if I work harder than somebody, I expect to get paid more. If I think things are just or equitable, then I'll be motivated to keep doing what I'm doing. But if I think they're not, then I'll change my behavior, sometimes for the negative. If I think there's injustice, that usually predicts some negative behavior from the employees. All right, so that's justice theory. This one's one of my favorites, expectancy theory. So essentially, it says that there are 3 things employees consider when they determine if they want to act in a motivated fashion. They're asking themselves these questions of how much do you want? How likely are you to get there? And the components they're looking at, the labels aren't super important as always, but they are expectancy, instrumentality, and valence. And these 3 things, I'll show you how they, in just a second, I'll show you how they motivate employees to perform. All right, so employees follow this thought process. First, they say, well, I'll exert effort if I think that I'll be able to perform well on the task. That's the expectancy component. That kind of maps onto core self-evaluations. So if I think I'll be successful, then I'll probably put the effort forward. The second thing I ask myself is, will I get the outcome I want if I perform at that level? It's like, if I work hard, does that result in a bonus? If it does, then yes, I'm likely to continue working towards this task. And then the last component, the valence, is how important is that outcome? So for outcomes that are more important than others, Like if I think a bonus is the most important thing in my life at the moment, then I'll work really hard for things that will help me get a bonus. But if it's a pizza party, if your boss always gives you pizza parties, then you're not going to be very motivated to work hard. That's a low valence situation. I would think of this as your key takeaway. Employees will only work hard if they believe they can be successful and that that success will lead them to a desired outcome. It's like, hey, I think I can do this and it's going to get me what I want. Therefore, I'm going to work hard. That's what I like about this theory. It makes a lot of sense. Question for y'all. What do you think this means for goal setting? Oh, and there are the answers. I meant to make that a transition. But it means that we should make goals attainable and goals should be clearly linked to desired outcomes. So if I'm telling my employee, here's my goal for you, I want you to increase your sales revenue, then it should be attainable. Remember, our SMART goals were attainable, but also relevant to some desired outcome. All right. That leads us into goal setting. So goal setting theory is another one of our process theories. It suggests that motivating goals are specific and challenging. This is how they built the SMART acronym based on goal setting theory. So specific, challenging. If we have goals that are like that, then they foster attention, effort, and persistence. One of the most common forms of this we see in organizations are stretch goals. So what are stretch goals? Why? You're on the right track. John, do you have something to add to that? Yeah, they're like right on the edge. They're just barely achievable, but they are achievable. But they push you to work harder than you think maybe you could have because that's the goal. They push you to expand your efforts. The good thing is that a lot of research supports the fact that if we give people stretch goals, they might think initially like, I don't know if I can do that. But if you're a good manager and you support their core self-evaluations and their self-efficacy and you give them your own like personal support, then they're motivated to work hard to achieve the things that they maybe thought they couldn't initially. There could be a downside though. What do you think could be a downside of stretch goals? Information? Maybe, yeah, it could be really stressful. If you don't give them enough support, they're like, this really sucks. This is hard. What do you think they might do as a result of that? What do you say, Maury? They might give up. That's one possible negative outcome. What's another one? Let me get Norelli first. I'll come back to you. What do you think? Oh yeah, they might quit. That's a bit even worse outcome. What were you thinking? Yeah, they might have lower performance, maybe because they're stressed. Yeah, those are all definitely correct answers. The one I was thinking of was it can lead people to act unethically. If I say like you have to increase your sales by 10% and they're like the last day before the deadline and they're at 3%, they might fudge the numbers or they might lie to a customer to get them to buy something they don't need to buy. I don't know. They might do something to cheat to attain the goal. So we have to be really careful with stretch goals to make sure people believe they can do it, to make sure they're not cheating to achieve it. One more thing about goal setting is this theory that says people have two different orientations towards goals. They have a learning goal orientation and a performance goal orientation. And if you're learning goal oriented, you tend to view goals as a way to develop confidence through the acquisition of new skills. So you see goals as a challenge to develop yourself. And if you have a performance goal orientation, you view goals as a way to demonstrate and validate competence. So if you think of like a theater major, they want to go on stage and get the applause and like show off their skills. It's very performance goal oriented. But if you think about, can you think of any examples of a learning goal oriented person? What kind of things they might do? Do y'all like give yourself goals to develop or grow as an individual? And if so, what are those goals, Connor? Teaching? Yeah. Like you want like yourself becoming a teacher and teaching others? Yeah, it's a very challenging thing to do. And you probably don't do it just to show off because teachers don't get a lot of glory. That's a good example. All right. There's a lot of research on goal orientation, and it suggests that one of them tends to be better than the other, and it's learning goal orientation. If you approach tasks with a learning goal orientation, and you can reframe it in your own mind, like I'm going to treat this like a chance to improve and develop, then you tend to perform better within that task, and you also learn more for the next time you try the task. So over time, you tend to get better. But if you focus on the performance aspect, you tend to perform less effectively, and also you don't get the benefit of learning from the experience because you're so focused on demonstrating success. Do y'all know when you're think back to a time when you're presenting in front of class? Let's say you have a performance mindset and you're giving a presentation. What are some thoughts that tend to run through your head? Positive or negative? Everybody? Yes, that tends to be the case. Usually it's more negative and less positive. And as a result of that, if we're focused on like, oh, did I say the wrong thing? Then it makes us get worse and worse and worse. It actually spirals out of control sometimes if we don't shut out those negative thoughts. So I would encourage you to try to adopt a learning goal orientation. The research shows that people have a preference in general. You can shift your orientation just by reframing things as an opportunity to learn. So think of, for example, your group presentations as an opportunity to learn. All right. So those are our process theories. Talk about job design perspective. Fitting people to jobs. That's kind of a weird thing to think about. Fitting jobs to people. And then the job characteristics model, which we talked about last week. We'll talk about it again. All right, so the first two options here, when we think about fitting people to jobs versus fitting jobs to people, option A is fitting people to jobs. It assumes that if we fit people to jobs, they'll gradually adapt to any work condition. We talked about scientific management in week 1 and how we can, for example, reduce the number of tasks that people have to complete. That'll make it easier for them to be efficient in their job. Okay. So that's option A. That's not very popular. Option B is far more popular, fitting jobs to people, where we try to make jobs more motivating just by how we design them. There's 2 techniques that are pretty popular right now, job enlargement and job enrichment. Those are different ways to fit the job to the person. If I enlarge the job, basically means I'm adding more variety. So like, all right, I'll spice your job up a bit. I'll give you some more roles that's not just busy work, but it's like fun things to do. Job enrichment is focused on adding more intrinsic motivation. So I might give them more responsibility or achievement or recognition. This would work particularly well if I tailor the job enrichment to what I think the people want. So if someone is high need for achievement, I might give them some aspect in their job that allows them to achieve things. That'd be very motivational for that person. All right. And then, of course, we can fit jobs to people using the job characteristics model. Remember we talked about last week, designing jobs in a way that helps people be motivated for success. So recap of these 5. Skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. Remember, these are the ways that we can add motivation to someone's job. We're not going to walk through these one by one since we did that last week, but I do want to show you all this graphic because I think it's pretty cool. These are the 5 things we can change in someone's job design. And the researchers showed that if we do these, it leads to these psychological states. So for example, if I increase skill variety, task identity, task significance, that makes people feel more meaningfulness in their work. That's very intrinsically motivating. And that leads to these positive outcomes. So they're more motivated, they have higher performance, they're more satisfied, they don't turn over, which is like they quit. If I give people more autonomy, so I don't micromanage them, then they feel more responsibility for their work. They take ownership. That's very motivating as well. And if I give people more feedback, that's like I give you more frequent performance evaluations, then you have more knowledge of results, which is like, you know what's going on, and that helps you be more motivated. Imagine a situation where you never know, like, am I doing good here? Or am I doing bad here? It can be stressful because you don't know if you're doing a good job. Okay. The blue part here, the contingency factors, are just well, there's some individual difference here that change how this process works. So people's knowledge and skills, their desire for growth, and then some contextual factors. All right. So that's our last design perspective. We're going to look at the reinforcement perspective. So 4 types of behavior modification and using behavior modification to motivate employees. All right. First up, here are 4 different ways we can use behavior modification. I'm not a huge fan of this theory because it's very kind of archaic. It's all about using rewards and punishments, which are very effective. But it suggests that the only way we can motivate people is through these different uses of rewards and punishment. There are 4 different ways we can use them. If we want to encourage continued behavior, we'll use positive reinforcement. So I'll provide a reward. If you're doing good, I'll give you a bonus, and that should encourage you to keep doing good. I can also do negative reinforcement, which means I take away a punishment. So like, let's say, I don't know what a punishment is, or a great example. Let's say, I don't know, everyone got docked pay because of layoffs or something, and you're doing really well, so I'm going to give you back your original pay. The key point here is that we're taking away something that they don't like. All right, so those are ways to encourage continued behavior. We can also encourage behavioral change. If we think things are not going as well as they could be, we can use extinction or punishment. Extinction means we're just withholding rewards, and punishment is we're administering punishment. That makes sense, right? There's like one thing I remember from my undergrad psychology class was that if you have a baby who's acting like a brat, you can use the extinction method. If you just ignore them, don't give them any attention, that tends to be very effective for making them stop being a brat. It's also useful in organizations. Don't give that person attention, and maybe they'll stop acting out. All right, I think one of the key takeaways here is that we can use punishments and rewards. When we talk about social power, I think that's next chapter. Those are very important, but they're not the only ways we can motivate people to work hard. Like, can y'all think of a way without using punishments and rewards to motivate better performance? Maybe some that your bosses use that you liked. Mine? Yeah, you could just talk to people. Yeah. One of the things we'll see is that if people see you as an expert in your job, if you talk to them and say like, hey, I think you could be doing better. Let's look at some ways you can improve your performance. It's really important you improve your performance. Then I can motivate them to do better without giving them a reward or a punishment. All right, we'll talk more about that next week. This is a little bit of a busy graphic. This is basically the 4 different ways we can use extinction and punishment. And it gives you kind of a flow chart. If you're having a pickle of a time with your employee, you can follow this flow chart. So it says, we have an employee who's not working very well, and we want them to work faster. If they respond positively, they start working faster. Then we can either give them positive reinforcement, like a promotion, or negative reinforcement, like I'm no longer nagging you. That could be a positive thing for them. And that'll help, hopefully, encourage them to continue doing well. If they don't respond positively, if I say you need to work faster, and they say, well, I'm not working faster because I've always worked at this pace, then I can use extinction or punishment in that case. All right. That's behavior modification. Something to think about with rewards and punishment is that if we use them smartly, they can be very effective. If we use them incorrectly, they can be counterproductive. Have you ever seen a situation where a boss gave either a reward, usually more so a punishment, that had a negative reaction by the staff? Maybe an example you want to share with the class. Like, my boss did this and it pissed everyone off. Understaffed? Oh, they understaffed on purpose? Wow. Why do they, what made them do that? Yeah, that's gonna make people mad. That sucks. Eric, what do you got? Literally cutting it first. They're like letting people go. Or, yeah. Was that a punishment for them that they were sending them home early, or? Oh, but they thought they were using it as a reward. Oh, yeah, yeah. That's an example of the manager thought they were doing something that people liked, but they didn't understand what people wanted, and it backfired. You have something, Rubisha? No. Yeah. Yikes. Yeah, it's not a good situation either. All right, so we can try to avoid that. If we're using rewards and punishments, first thing is to give rewards and punishments as soon as possible. If we see something good, if you see something, say something. Y'all have heard that. Not in that context. And if we see something bad, give them immediate feedback rather than waiting. If you wait till the end of the year for the performance evaluation, and then you say, like, all right, here's a long list of all the things I'm not happy with, it's not going to go very well. There's this principle called the hot stove effect. Have y'all heard of the hot stove effect before? It basically says babies learn not to touch a hot stove because when they touch a stove, they get burned immediately. But imagine if you touch a stove and you got burnt 10 minutes later, you wouldn't be able to associate the burn with the fact that you touched a hot stove. And you would never learn not to touch the stove again because it wasn't an immediate reaction. Does that make sense? So people will be able to link, like they know why if it comes sooner after the fact. Along those lines, provide clear rationale for punishments and rewards. If you make it really clear, this person was punished because they did this bad thing, or this person got a promotion because they were the best worker. That makes it more clear for employees that they can achieve those outcomes if they do the same thing. But it's also very stressful, the opposite end of the spectrum. If it's not clear why somebody was punished, then you're afraid because you don't know if you're going to be punished too for no reason at all. So make sure the rationale is clear. And then last, recognize publicly, punish privately. That's a good rule of thumb as a manager. If someone did something really good, speak up and recognize them in front of the group. That does two things. It makes people feel good, but it also shows all the other staff, like this person's getting praise because they did something that was good. So maybe I can do that too and get the praise. What do you think happens if you punish publicly? It's still fear. That's one result. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. If you see people getting punished, you're going to be more afraid. Let's say I punish Mike and it's a very valid reason. So you're not afraid to get punished because it's like, Mike, you did this. It was really bad. Don't ever do it again. But I say it in front of the whole group. And it's clear rationale. Everyone understands. So they might not be afraid this is going to happen to them, but what's another negative outcome of that? Is that very professional for one thing? Definitely not. Mike's going to get mad at me. He's going to be embarrassed. It's just bad. So punishing privately, not only is it more professional, but people tend to respond better to that if you pull them aside and say, hey, like Mike, come here for a sec. Let's talk privately. That's a way better way to approach that. All right. So key takeaway, I know I disparaged rewards and punishments, but they are very effective if used appropriately. And we also need to recognize that they're not the only way to motivate people, but we'll save that for next week. All right. A little bit more about rewards. We'll talk about monetary and non-monetary compensation. All right. We should know the answer to this question already. Money is not always the best motivator. And when it comes to compensation, as most things, it depends on what people want. So some people want a higher salary or more bonuses. Some people want more flexibility. This survey found that career growth was more important for job seekers than salary and benefits. That's not super useful because that lumps everyone together. We know that some people want different things, and also different generations want different things. So we have to be smart about designing compensation. We We mentioned this when we talked about the HR practices. There are different ways to provide monetary compensation. We talked about salary, bonuses, profit sharing. We didn't talk about pay for performance. That's actually a really, it's becoming more and more common to tell people if you work harder, you're going to get paid more. Okay, as we discussed, the best compensation package, well, we talked about these things so far. Satisfies individual needs. That was one of our midterm questions, remember? Ask people what they want and then give it to them. It's linked to performance in a measurable way, and it's believable and achievable. And these can be linked back to our expectancy theory. So if it satisfies people's needs and has a high valence, they're going to want to pursue that. If it's linked to outcomes, that increases instrumentality, if you want to use the technical terms. And then if they believe they can succeed, that increases their expectancy. Something else we've discussed is getting people to buy into the process. So make sure that this is agreed upon by managers and employees. All right. If we want to use non-monetary ways, there are lots of ways we can do so. I think one of the key takeaways from this whole chapter is that people are motivated by different things. So if you think about the different content perspectives, people are motivated by achievement, and some are motivated by self-actualization. So the key thing as a manager is figure out what do people want, and then see if we can provide incentives for them to keep them motivated. So for example, if someone prioritizes work-life balance, I'm going to give that person more flex time. If they value personal growth, I might give them tuition reimbursement, something that Starbucks does for their employees. Okay, whatever it is, make sure it's linked to what it is that they need as an individual. All right. We got through this chapter pretty quick. Any questions on motivation? All right, hope y'all found that interesting. Here's the attendance slide for today. We'll do chapter 13 on Thursday. All right, thanks y'all. See you Thursday.